The clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m. as Mike Reynolds ran his mop across the last section of the executive floor at Meridian Financial. His movements were practiced and efficient after 4 years of cleaning the same spaces. The building was quiet at this hour, just the way he liked it. During the day, the hallways buzzed with important people in expensive suits who barely noticed him. At night, he had the place to himself, with only his thoughts and occasionally the night security guard for company. Mike paused to wipe the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. At 42, his body reminded him more often that the physical work took its toll. His hands were rough from years of handling cleaning chemicals, a far cry from the nimble fingers that once danced across piano keys with ease. Sometimes, when he was alone, he would flex them and remember how they used to move. As he finished the floor, he glanced at his watch. Still enough time to catch the last bus home if he hurried. His daughter Zoe would be waiting up for him, despite his countless reminders that 14-year-olds needed proper sleep on school nights. But she was stubborn like her mother, always saying she couldn't sleep well until she knew he was home safe. The thought of his late wife Jessica still created a hollow feeling in his chest. Even 3 years after losing her to cancer, some days the pain felt duller, but it never truly went away. How could it when he saw her eyes looking back at him from Zoe's face every day? Mike wheeled his cleaning cart to the supply closet, quickly organizing his materials for tomorrow's shift. As he worked, he hummed softly, an old habit from his music days. It was a piece he had composed himself during college, back when everyone said he had a promising future ahead. His professors at the state university had called him gifted, telling him he could go far with his talent for composition. That seemed like another lifetime now. A lifetime before unexpected pregnancies and rushed marriages, before mortgage payments and medical bills. A lifetime before the practical concerns of raising a family had pushed his dreams of making music aside. Mike locked the supply closet and headed toward the elevator. As he passed the grand reception area, his eyes lingered on the sleek black piano that stood in the corner. It was mostly for show, a status symbol that completed the elegant decor of Meridian Financial's lobby. Occasionally, hired musicians would play during special events, but most days it sat untouched. He allowed himself a moment of weakness, walking over to the instrument. He didn't dare sit down. Cameras were everywhere, and he couldn't risk his job. But he let his calloused fingers hover just above the keys, not quite touching them. In his mind, he could hear the notes, a phantom melody from a path not taken. "You still playing that thing in your head?" The voice startled him. Mike turned to see Ray, the night security guard, watching him from his desk with a knowing smile. "Just admiring it," Mike replied, pulling his hand back quickly. "Beautiful instrument," Ray nodded. 15 years I've worked here, and I've seen you look at that piano the same way at least 100 times. Why don't you ever play it?" Mike shrugged, embarrassed at being caught. "Not really part of my job description. Plus, I'm pretty rusty these days. Nobody's here but us," Ray pointed out, "and I'd sure appreciate some entertainment during my shift." Mike shook his head. "Thanks, but I've got a bus to catch." "So he's waiting up." Ray's expression softened at the mention of Mike's daughter. "How's she doing? Still getting those good grades?" Pride momentarily pushed aside Mike's fatigue. "Top of her class. Got a perfect score on her science project last week." "Smart kid," Ray said. "Takes after her dad, I bet," Mike laughed. "Smarter than me, that's for sure. She's already talking about college scholarships, looking at schools with good science programs." The thought of college tuition caused a familiar knot of anxiety to form in Mike's stomach. Despite working overtime whenever it was offered and picking up weekend cleaning jobs for extra cash, his savings for Zoe's education were nowhere near what they needed to be. The medical bills from Jessica's illness had wiped out most of their emergency fund, and they were still paying off the last of the funeral expenses. "I better get going," Mike said, glancing at his watch again. "See you tomorrow, Ray." The night air was cool as Mike hurried to the bus stop. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself, wishing he could afford a new one. Winter was coming, and last year's coat barely kept out the chill anymore. But Zoe needed new winter boots more than he needed a jacket, so that's where the next bit of extra money would go. The bus was nearly empty at this hour. Mike sank into a seat near the back, letting his tired body relax for the first time in hours. He closed his eyes just for a moment and immediately saw Jessica's face. She had always been his biggest supporter, believing in his music even when he'd stopped believing in it himself, You'll find your way back to it someday, she had told him once, during her final months. Promise me you won't forget who you are. He had promised, but the truth was sometimes he did forget. Between work shifts and parent-teacher conferences, grocery shopping and helping with homework, it was easy to lose sight of the young man who once dreamed of hearing his compositions performed in concert halls. The bus lurched to a stop at his corner, jolting him from his thoughts. Mike's apartment building was just a block away, a modest complex in a neighborhood that wasn't the worst in the city, but certainly wasn't the best either. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his unit, his legs protesting every step after a long day on his feet. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen and 1 bathroom, but Mike had worked hard to make it feel like home. The walls were painted in warm colors and framed photos of happier times lined the shelves. Jessica's old piano keyboard stood in the corner, covered with a cloth. Mike hadn't touched it since she died, but he couldn't bring himself to sell it either. "Dad, is that you?" Zoe's voice called out from her bedroom as he unlocked the door. "It's me, kiddo. Told you not to wait up," he answered, setting down his keys and lunch bag. Zoe appeared in her doorway, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing her favorite oversized t-shirt as pajamas. She had her mother's eyes, deep brown and expressive, but Mike's stubborn chin. "I was studying," she said, holding up her textbook as evidence. "I have a big test tomorrow." Mike smiled, knowing she was probably telling the truth. Unlike him at her age, Zoe took school seriously. "You need to sleep to remember all that stuff, you know." "I know," she said, putting the book down and giving him a quick hug. "Did you eat dinner?" "I had a sandwich during my break," Mike lied. He'd skipped dinner to finish a cleaning job in one of the executive offices that had been particularly messy. "Did you eat the pasta I left?" Zoe nodded. "There's still some left if you're hungry." "I'm good," he said, kicking off his shoes. "Just tired?" He noticed a letter on the kitchen counter with the school letterhead. "What's this?" "Oh." Zoe's face lit up. "Mrs. Chen wants me to join the science competition team. We'd go to the state finals if we qualify. The letter explains everything." Mike picked it up, scanning the contents. His heart sank slightly when he saw the participation fee and the required parent contribution for supplies. Another expense they couldn't really afford, but how could he say no to something that clearly meant so much to her? "That's amazing, Zoe," he said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "Really proud of you. So I can do it?" she asked, bouncing slightly on her toes. "Of course," he said, already mentally calculating which bill payment he could delay to make it work. "We'll figure it out." Zoe squealed and threw her arms around him. "Thank you. I promise I'll work super hard." "I know you will," he said, hugging her back. "Now go to bed, seriously." After Zoe returned to her room, Mike sank onto the couch, the day's exhaustion hitting him all at once. He quietly unfolded the letter again, looking at the cost. Between this and the winter clothes she needed, something else would have to give. Maybe he could ask his boss about more overtime hours. Mike's eyes drifted to the covered keyboard in the corner. There was another option, one he hadn't considered in years. A music store downtown had posted a sign seeking piano teachers for evening lessons. He'd seen it on his way to a weekend cleaning job and had briefly, very briefly, considered inquiring. But the idea of playing again after so long, of putting himself out there as a teacher when he'd abandoned his own training, felt impossible. Still, for Zoe, he would consider the impossible. Maybe it was time to uncover the keyboard, to see if his fingers remembered what his heart had never forgotten. Maybe Jessica had been right all along. Maybe there was a way back to the music even now. Mike leaned his head back against the couch, too tired to move to his bedroom just yet. Tomorrow would be another long day of invisible work, of being the man nobody noticed as he emptied their trash and cleaned their messes. But somewhere beneath the weariness and worry, a tiny spark flickered to life, the first hint of a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to his story than being just the janitor nobody saw. The notice about Meridian Financial's 25th anniversary celebration had been posted on the employee bulletin board for weeks. Mike had cleaned around it every night, barely giving it a second glance. Company parties weren't exactly events where janitors were welcome, though technically all staff were invited. Besides, he had picked up an extra cleaning job that Saturday to help cover Zoe's science team fees. But 3 days before the big event, Mike's supervisor Tom called him into his cramped office near the maintenance area. "Reynolds," Tom said, not looking up from his computer. "Need you to switch your weekend schedule. Corporate wants all hands on deck for setup and cleanup for this anniversary thing." Mike shifted uncomfortably. "I actually had another job lined up for Saturday." Tom finally looked at him, eyebrows raised. "This isn't really a request. They're paying double overtime for everyone working the event." Double overtime. Mike quickly did the math in his head. That would actually be more than what he'd make at the other job. "What time do you need me?" "Be here at noon for setup. Party starts at 7, runs till midnight. You'll stay till everything's cleaned up, probably around 2 a.m. Mike nodded, already thinking about how he needed to rearrange childcare. Normally, Zoe stayed with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, on Saturday afternoons when he worked. But an overnight shift would complicate things. "One more thing," Tom added as Mike turned to leave. "They want all staff in uniform. Clean black pants, white shirt, company vest. They'll provide the vest." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. The entire building hummed with anticipation as decorators, caterers, and event staff transformed the grand atrium into what the CEO was calling an event worthy of Meridian's legacy. Mike and the other maintenance workers were tasked with moving furniture, hanging decorations too high for the event staff to reach, and making sure every inch of marble and glass gleamed. On Friday night, as Mike was finishing his regular shift, he noticed workers delivering a gleaming black grand piano to the center of the atrium. It was significantly larger and more impressive than the upright that usually sat in the reception area. He paused his mopping to watch as they carefully positioned it on a small raised platform that had been built especially for the occasion. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Mike turned to see one of the event coordinators, a slim woman with short gray hair and a tablet clutched to her chest. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, turning back to his mop. He had learned long ago that the less visible he made himself, the easier his job was. "They flew in a pianist from New York," she continued, apparently not noticing his attempt to fade into the background. "He's played at Carnegie Hall twice. Cost a fortune, but Mr. Peterson insisted on the best for tomorrow." Mike nodded politely, feeling a familiar twinge of what might have been envy or regret. Once, many years ago, he had dreamed of playing in places like Carnegie Hall. Now he cleaned floors in a building where people could afford to fly in famous musicians for a corporate party. "Anyway," the woman said, checking something on her tablet, "we need this area spotless by morning. The florist is coming at 8 to set up the arrangements around the piano." "Yes, ma'am," Mike said again, returning to his mopping with renewed focus. When he finally got home that night, he found Zoe still awake, working on what looked like a complex science project spread across their small kitchen table. "You should be in bed," he said, setting down his lunch bag. "I know, but I'm almost done," she said without looking up from the circuit board she was wiring. "Mrs. Chen is going to drive me to the library tomorrow to use the reference books for the research portion." Mike hung up his jacket. "About tomorrow. I need to work a double shift at Meridian. They're having some big party and need me there all night." Now Zoe looked up, her eyes widening with concern. "All night? Where am I supposed to stay?" "I talked to Mrs. Chen. She said you can sleep on her couch if I'm not back by midnight." Zoe frowned. "Her apartment smells like mothballs and old soup." "Zoe," Mike said with a warning tone, "Mrs. Chen is doing us a favor. And it's just for one night." Zoe sighed dramatically but nodded. "Fine, but you owe me pancakes on Sunday morning." Mike smiled, relieved. "Deal." The next day, Mike arrived at Meridian at noon as instructed. The building was unrecognizable. The normally pristine, minimalist atrium had been transformed with elegant lighting, floral arrangements, and shimmering decorations in the company's colors of blue and silver. A large banner hung across the main entrance. Meridian Financial, 25 years of excellence. Staff bustled about carrying trays, adjusting tablecloths, and arranging chairs. Mike was given his list of tasks. First help finish the setup, then change into his uniform before guests arrived, then stand by for inevitable spills and messes during the event, and finally tackle the cleanup after everyone left. By 6:30, everything was ready. Mike had changed into his required outfit: black pants, white shirt, and the blue vest provided by the company, with a small Meridian logo embroidered on the breast pocket. He felt stiff and uncomfortable, especially since the vest was slightly too small across his shoulders. He stood with the other maintenance staff in a back hallway as Tom gave them their assignments for the evening. Reynolds, you take the main atrium. Garcia, you handle the executive dining area. Washington, you've got the outdoor terrace. Mike nodded, accepting the discreet earpiece that would allow Tom to contact him if he was needed anywhere else. Then he took his position near one of the service doors, a cleaning cart tucked discreetly behind a decorative screen, ready to deal with any messes as they occurred. The guests began arriving promptly at 7, executives in expensive suits and dresses, important clients, business partners, and local dignitaries. Mike watched them from his station, observing how differently they moved through the world compared to people like him. There was a confidence to their posture, a certainty that they belonged in rooms like this. By 8:30, the party was in full swing. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in one corner, and the grand piano sat waiting in the center. For the special performance scheduled for 9 o'clock, Mike had already cleaned up 2 spilled drinks and 1 dropped plate of food when he overheard a fragment of conversation from a group of managers standing near his position. Still can't believe Davidson is a no-show, said a tall man, with a receding hairline, checking his watch. Peterson is going to be furious. His agent called an hour ago, replied a woman in a blue dress. Food poisoning, apparently. He's too sick to perform. So what's the plan for the piano? Asked a third person, gesturing with his champagne glass toward the gleaming instrument. It's the centerpiece of the whole event. I don't know, the woman sighed. Events team is scrambling to find a replacement, but on a Saturday night with no notice. The conversation drifted away as the group moved toward the bar. Mike continued his work, moving quietly through the crowd to collect abandoned glasses and napkins. He tried not to look at the piano as he passed it, but found his eyes drawn to it anyway. Under the special lighting designed to highlight it, the instrument seemed to glow with possibility. By 9:15, a ripple of tension spread through the event staff. Mike could see the gray-haired coordinator from yesterday speaking urgently into her phone while gesturing to the piano. Nearby, a man Mike recognized as CEO Peter Peterson was frowning deeply, checking his watch every few minutes. Mike was cleaning up a spill near one of the high cocktail tables when his earpiece crackled. Reynolds, came Tom's voice. Need you in the west corridor immediately. Someone got sick in the hallway outside the restrooms. Mike acknowledged the order and quickly made his way across the atrium. As he passed near a group of mid-level executives he recognized from the marketing department, he heard his job title mentioned and instinctively slowed his pace. Desperate for entertainment, a red-faced man was saying loudly, the slight slur in his voice suggesting he'd had several drinks. Look, even the janitor could play for all I care. Mike kept walking, but not before hearing someone else in the group laugh and reply, That's actually not a bad idea, David. Hey, you. Janitor! Mike pretended not to hear, quickening his pace toward the west corridor. But the man was persistent. Hey, blue vest, yes you! Mike reluctantly turned around. The man who had called out to him, David, was grinning broadly and gesturing him over. Surrounded by his colleagues, all holding champagne glasses and wearing similar amused expressions, he looked like a king holding court. You busy right now? David asked as Mike approached. Sir, I need to attend to a situation in the west corridor, Mike said politely. David waved his hand dismissively. This will just take a second. We have a little problem. Our pianist is a no-show and the big boss is getting antsy. He gestured toward Peterson, who was now in deep conversation with several board members. So we had this crazy idea. Why doesn't one of the staff play something? Just until they figure out a real solution. Mike felt his chest tighten. I don't think... Have you ever played the piano? Interrupted a woman standing next to David. Her tone was curious, but her smile suggested she was in on the joke. Before Mike could answer, David laughed. Come on, what are the chances? But honestly, even if you just plink out chopsticks or something, it would be better than that thing sitting there unused when Peterson specifically requested live music. Mike looked around at the expectant faces in the group. Some seemed genuinely amused by the situation, while others looked embarrassed on his behalf. He thought about just walking away. He had a legitimate task to attend to after all, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Actually, he found himself saying, I do play, or at least I used to. The group fell momentarily silent, clearly not expecting this response. Then David's face lit up with fresh amusement. Well, how about that? Our janitor is a man of hidden talents. He gestured grandly toward the piano. In that case, my friend, would you do us the honor of a performance? Mike hesitated, his mind racing. He hadn't played seriously in years, not since Jessica got sick. And certainly not on an instrument like that, in front of people like these. It was clearly meant as a joke at his expense. These people were expecting him to either embarrass himself by playing poorly or back down entirely. His earpiece crackled again. Reynolds, what's the holdup? We need you in West Corridor now. I'm sorry, sir, Mike said to David, gesturing to his earpiece. I'm needed elsewhere. As he turned to go, he heard David call after him loud enough for nearby groups to hear. Oh, come on! Don't tell me our janitor has stage fright. Just one song. Mike kept walking, his face burning with a mixture of anger and shame. Behind him, he could hear laughter from the group, along with a comment that sounded like, "What did you expect? He probably can't even read music." But before he could reach the service door, he nearly collided with Tom coming through it. There you are, Tom said, irritation clear in his voice. Didn't you hear me calling you? I was just on my way, Mike explained, gesturing behind him. Some of the guests stopped me. Tom glanced over Mike's shoulder, then did a double take when he realized which group of people had detained his employee. His expression changed from irritation to concern. They giving you trouble? Nothing I can't handle, Mike assured him. Tom seemed about to say something else when his own earpiece apparently delivered a message. His face fell. Great. Now Peterson's asking about the piano situation. Mike hesitated for just a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. I can play. Tom stared at him. What? The piano. I can play it. Mike took a deep breath. If it would help. Tom's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. You're serious? You actually know how to play that thing? Mike nodded. I studied music in college before life happened. Tom looked him up and down as if seeing him for the first time. Huh. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. Can't make things any worse, I guess. Let me check with the event coordinator. As Tom stepped away to make the call, Mike stood very still, hardly believing what he had just offered to do. After years of keeping his head down, of being invisible, he had just volunteered to put himself at the center of attention, all because he couldn't stand the thought of those people thinking they were right about him. He wasn't sure if he was making a terrible mistake or finally doing something he should have done long ago. Tom returned 5 minutes later with the gray-haired event coordinator in tow. She looked Mike up and down with obvious skepticism. Tom tells me you can play, she said, her tone making it clear she didn't quite believe it. How well exactly? Mike shifted uncomfortably. I studied at State for 3 years. I was working toward a performance degree before I had to leave. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Classical training? Yes, ma'am. She glanced at her tablet, then at the waiting piano, then back at Mike. Do you know any Chopin? Peterson loves Chopin. I know several of his pieces, Mike said, a flutter of nerves beginning in his stomach. She sighed heavily. Well, we're desperate, and Peterson is starting to make noise about the empty piano. Can you play for 20 minutes? Just enough time for us to figure out a more permanent solution. Mike nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. I can do that. Fine, she turned to Tom. Get him ready. I'll announce it as... What's your name again? Mike Reynolds. I'll announce it as a special performance by Mike Reynolds, she said, making a note on her tablet. 5 minutes. As she hurried away, Tom gave Mike a worried look. You sure about this? Those marketing guys are already treating it like a joke. Mike glanced over at David and his group, who were watching with amused expressions, clearly expecting entertainment of a different sort than what was typically featured at Meridian events. I'm sure, Mike said. Though his racing heart suggested otherwise, Tom nodded. All right then. I'll take care of the mess in the West Corridor. You, do whatever you need to do to get ready. Left alone, Mike found a quiet corner and flexed his fingers. They were calloused in different places now. Rough from cleaning supplies rather than smooth from piano keys. Would they even remember how to move properly? It had been so long since he'd played anything more complex than simple tunes on Jessica's old keyboard. He closed his eyes and tried to recall the pieces he once knew by heart. Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 No. 2 came to mind first, a piece he had played countless times during his college years. He ran through it mentally, his fingers twitching slightly as they traced imaginary keys. The event coordinator's voice over the sound system interrupted his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, while we await our scheduled entertainment, we're pleased to offer a special performance by Mike Reynolds. Please give him your attention. A smattering of polite applause followed. Mike took a deep breath and stepped out from his corner, walking toward the piano with as much confidence as he could muster. As he crossed the atrium, he could feel dozens of eyes on him, could hear the whispers. Isn't that the janitor? What is this, some kind of joke? Did they really not find anyone else? He kept his gaze fixed on the piano, ignoring the confused looks and suppressed laughter. From the corner of his eye, he could see David and his group watching with open amusement, champagne glasses raised as if in toast to the entertainment about to unfold. The piano bench felt foreign beneath him as he sat down. The keys gleamed under the spotlights, pristine and intimidating. Mike placed his hands on them, surprised by how natural it felt despite everything. He took another deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first few notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the atrium, tentative at first as his fingers reacquainted themselves with their old purpose. There were a few stumbles in the opening bars, enough to elicit a chuckle from somewhere in the crowd. But then something shifted. Maybe it was muscle memory taking over, or perhaps it was the familiar comfort of losing himself in the music. Whatever the reason, Mike's playing suddenly transformed. His fingers moved with increasing confidence, coaxing a rich emotional tone from the instrument. The gentle, flowing melody rose and fell with perfect precision, each note given exactly the right weight and feeling. The Nocturne was a piece that required both technical skill and emotional depth, and somehow, despite the years away from serious playing, Mike had retained both. He forgot about the crowd, forgot about David and his mocking friends, forgot about being the janitor that nobody noticed. For the first time in years, he was just a musician again, speaking through the keys in a language more natural to him than words. The room had fallen completely silent, where moments before there had been conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses. Now there was only the sound of the piano and the collective held breath of 200 people. Even the servers had stopped in their tracks, trays balanced in motionless hands as they listened. Mike finished the Nocturne with a delicate, perfect final chord that seemed to hang in the air even after the sound itself had faded. For a moment nobody moved or spoke. Then the room erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. He opened his eyes, momentarily startled by the response. He caught sight of David and his group, their expressions transformed from amusement to astonishment. The woman who had been in on the joke stood with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. But Mike barely had time to register their reaction before his hands were moving again, almost of their own accord. This time they found their way to a piece he had composed himself, something he had written for Jessica during their first year together. It was more modern than Chopin, with touches of jazz influence mingled with classical structure, but it carried the same emotional weight. As he played his own composition, memories of Jessica flooded back. Her smile when she first heard the piece, the way she used to sit beside him on their old sofa as he worked out the melody, her unshakable belief in his talent even when he doubted himself. The music became a conversation with her ghost. Every note a word in a language only they had shared. He was so lost in the performance that he didn't notice CEO Peter Peterson approaching the piano until the man was standing just a few feet away, watching with an intensity that would have been unnerving had Mike been aware of it. He didn't see the way Peterson's expression changed as the music continued, how the hard lines of the executive's face softened, how his eyes grew suspiciously bright in the dim lighting. Mike simply played, pouring years of unspoken feelings into the keys. He played for Jessica, for Zoe, for the life he'd once imagined and the one he'd actually lived. He played for the young man who had walked away from music, and for the middle-aged janitor who had found his way back to it in the most unexpected way. When the final notes of his composition faded, the silence that followed was profound. Not the awkward quiet of people unsure how to react, but the reverent stillness that comes after witnessing something genuine and moving. Then once again applause filled the atrium, louder this time, accompanied by exclamations and even a few whistles. Mike finally looked up, blinking as if waking from a dream. The crowd had gathered closer around the piano, their faces showing everything from amazement to tears. He spotted Ray, the night security guard, standing near the back with a huge grin and 2 thumbs up. The event coordinator was frantically signaling for him to continue. Her earlier skepticism replaced by enthusiastic gesturing, Tom stood nearby looking both shocked and proudly vindicated. And there, directly in front of the piano now, stood Peter Peterson himself. The CEO's face was difficult to read, a mixture of surprise and something else, something almost like pain. He was blinking rapidly, and Mike realized with a start that the man's eyes were wet. Mike hesitated, unsure what to do next. He had played the 2 pieces that had come most naturally to him, that had lived in his muscle memory despite the years of neglect. What else could he offer that would maintain this unexpected connection with the audience? Then he remembered a piece he had composed during the darkest days of Jessica's illness, a melody that had come to him during long nights in hospital waiting rooms. He had never written it down, never performed it for anyone. It existed only in his head and heart, a private expression of grief and hope in the strange, terrible beauty that can exist even in the midst of loss. His fingers found the opening notes hesitantly at first, feeling their way through a piece that had never been played outside his imagination. But soon the music flowed, raw and honest, filled with dissonance that resolved into unexpected harmony, mirroring the messy reality of life and loss. As he played, he noticed a single tear track down Peterson's cheek, catching the light before the CEO quickly wiped it away. The man's eyes never left Mike's hands, following every movement with an intensity that suggested the music was speaking directly to something within him. Mike didn't know about the CEO's own recent loss. His wife of 30 years had passed away just 6 months earlier after a long battle with the same cancer that had taken Jessica. He couldn't know that Peterson had been criticized by the board for becoming distant and cold since his wife's death, that rumors had circulated about his emotional stability and fitness to lead. All Mike knew was that his music was connecting with people in a way he had once dreamed it would, back when he was a young student with ambitions of concert halls and recordings. The irony wasn't lost on him, that this moment had come not in some prestigious venue, but in the building where he emptied trash cans and mopped floors, while wearing a too small company vest with a cleaning cart hidden nearby. When he finished his 3rd piece, Peterson stepped forward and extended his hand. Mike stood awkwardly, suddenly acutely aware of his uniform and status. "That was extraordinary," Peterson said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Truly extraordinary. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Peter Peterson." "Mike Reynolds," Mike replied, shaking the offered hand. "I work maintenance." "Night shift." Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. "And where did you learn to play like that, Mr. Reynolds?" "State University," Mike answered. "I studied there for 3 years before I had to leave." "Had to leave?" Peterson repeated, genuine curiosity in his voice. Mike hesitated, uncomfortable with the attention. "Family circumstances. My wife got pregnant. We needed income more than I needed a music degree." Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "And that last piece, I don't recognize it." "Who composed that?" "I did," Mike admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable. "I never wrote it down. It was just something I played for myself during a difficult time." The CEO looked at him with new interest, as if seeing through the janitor's uniform to the person beneath it. "Would you mind playing one more?" "Anything you like." Mike glanced around at the waiting crowd, at the event coordinator who was nodding vigorously, at Tom who gave him an encouraging thumbs up. Then he sat back down at the piano, his hands already knowing where to go next. For his final piece, Mike chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, a composition that had always felt like a conversation between light and shadow. His fingers moved across the keys with renewed confidence, drawing out the gentle rises and falls of the melody. The piece began softly, like moonlight first appearing behind clouds, then gradually built to its emotional peak before returning to the quiet reflection of its opening theme. When he finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. People were standing now, their faces showing something Mike hadn't expected. Respect. Not pity, not amusement, but genuine respect. Even David and his group from marketing had abandoned their smirks for expressions of admiration. Peterson was the first to speak, as the applause began to fade. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've just witnessed something extraordinary." He turned to Mike. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for sharing your gift with us tonight." Mike nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say. After years of being nearly invisible in this building, the sudden attention felt overwhelming. The event coordinator hurried over, beaming. "That was magnificent. Would you consider playing throughout the evening? We'll compensate you, of course, the same rate we would have paid our scheduled pianist." Before Mike could respond, Peterson interjected. "Double it, and add it to his regular pay for tonight." She blinked in surprise but quickly recovered. "Yes, sir." Of course, Mike's head was spinning. The pianist rate for an event like this would be several $100s, more than he made in a week of regular shifts. "Thank you, sir. I'd be happy to continue playing." Peterson nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply patted Mike's shoulder and moved away to rejoin some board members who were waiting nearby. For the next 2 hours, Mike played everything from classical pieces to jazz standards, taking brief breaks only to rest his hands and sip water, brought to him by servers who now treated him with the deference usually reserved for honored guests. Several times he caught snippets of conversation about himself, people asking each other who he was, where he had studied, why a man with such talent was working as a janitor. During one break, Tom approached him, shaking his head in disbelief. "Reynolds, I've worked with you for 4 years and had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Mike shrugged. Never seemed relevant to mopping floors. "Well, you've sure made an impression tonight. Peterson has been asking questions about you." A flicker of worry crossed Mike's face. "What kind of questions?" "Good ones," Tom assured him. "How long you've worked here, your background." "Nothing to worry about." As the night wore on, Mike noticed Peterson watching him from different points in the room, always with the same thoughtful expression. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and the CEO would nod slightly before turning back to his conversations. There was something different about the way the man looked at him now, a recognition that hadn't been there before. Around midnight, as the party began to wind down, Peterson approached the piano again. He waited until Mike finished the piece he was playing, then leaned in to speak quietly. "Would you join me in my office for a moment, Mr. Reynolds? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Mike glanced at Tom, who was supervising cleanup nearby. Tom nodded, indicating it was okay to go. "Of course, sir," Mike said, rising from the bench. He followed Peterson to the private elevator that led directly to the executive floor. They rode in silence, Mike acutely aware of his janitor's uniform and worn shoes next to Peterson's immaculate suit. The CEO's office was larger than Mike's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city at night, and elegant furniture in dark wood and leather created an atmosphere of power and privilege. Peterson gestured to a chair in front of his desk. "Please, sit down." Mike perched on the edge of the seat, feeling out of place among such luxury. Peterson remained standing, walking to a credenza where a framed photograph stood among various awards and mementos. He picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, then brought it to Mike. "This was my wife, Catherine," he said, handing over the frame. The photo showed Peterson, looking younger and more relaxed than Mike had ever seen him, with his arm around a smiling woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair. "She was beautiful," Mike said honestly. Peterson nodded. "She passed away 6 months ago, cancer." "I'm very sorry," Mike said, a familiar ache in his chest. "My wife, she died of cancer too, 3 years ago." Peterson's eyes met his, a flash of recognition passing between them. "That last piece you composed, the one you said you wrote during a difficult time, I felt like you were playing my thoughts. Things I haven't been able to put into words since Catherine died." Mike swallowed hard. Music sometimes says what words can't. "Yes," Peterson agreed quietly. He took the photo back, replacing it carefully on the credenza. Catherine was a pianist too. Not professionally, but she played beautifully. We had a baby grand in our home for 20 years. After she died, I couldn't stand to look at it. Had it put into storage." He turned back to face Mike. "But listening to you tonight, I heard music the way she would want me to hear it again, not as a reminder of loss, but as an expression of life." Mike nodded, understanding completely. Peterson took a seat behind his desk. "Tell me, Mr. Reynolds, if you don't mind my asking, why maintenance work? With your talent, surely there were other options." Mike thought about how to answer. The full story was long and complicated, a series of choices and circumstances, some within his control and some not. "When Jessica got pregnant, I left school to work full-time. After Zoe was born, one job led to another. The music industry isn't exactly stable, and we needed health insurance, especially after Jessica got sick. By the time she passed away, I had bills to pay, a daughter to raise on my own. This job has regular hours, benefits, and your daughter. How old is she now? 14, Mike said, a smile automatically coming to his face at the thought of Zoe. Smart kid. Top of her class in science, Peterson nodded thoughtfully. I see. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Mr. Reynolds, I'm going to be direct. Meridian is establishing a new community outreach program focused on arts education. It's something Catherine was passionate about, and the board has approved it as part of our anniversary initiatives. We need someone to head up the music portion, someone with both technical knowledge and emotional understanding of what music can mean to people. Mike stared at him, not quite grasping what was being suggested. Based on what I heard tonight, I believe you would be perfect for the role, Peterson continued. The position would involve organizing performances, developing educational programs, and some teaching. The salary would be significantly more than your current compensation. Mike's heart began to race. Sir, I don't have a degree. I never finished school. Peterson waved his hand dismissively. What you demonstrated tonight is worth more than any degree. You have genuine talent and, more importantly, the ability to connect with people through music. That can't be taught. I don't know what to say, Mike admitted, feeling as if he were in a dream. You don't need to decide right now, Peterson assured him. Take the weekend to think about it. We can discuss details on Monday, but I want you to know the offer is serious. Mike nodded, still stunned. Thank you, sir. I will definitely think about it. Good. Peterson stood, signaling the end of their conversation. And Mr. Reynolds? Thank you again for your performance tonight. It meant more than you know. As Mike rode the elevator back down to the main floor, his mind was reeling. The night had taken a turn he could never have imagined when he arrived for his shift hours earlier. He had come as a janitor and was leaving as, what exactly? A musician again? A potential program director? It seemed impossible. Yet Peterson had been completely serious. The atrium was nearly empty now, with just cleaning staff remaining to restore the space to its usual pristine condition. Tom looked up from directing a crew moving tables. Everything okay? He asked, eyeing Mike's dazed expression. I think so, Mike replied. Mr. Peterson offered me a job. A different job? Tom's eyebrows shot up. No kidding. Doing what? Something with music. Community outreach. Mike still couldn't quite believe it himself. Tom grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. Well, after what you showed everyone tonight, I'm not surprised. Congratulations. I haven't accepted yet, Mike cautioned. He wants me to think about it over the weekend. What's to think about? Tom asked. Mike smiled slightly. A lot, actually. It would be a big change. Tom nodded understandingly. Well, the rest of this cleanup is covered if you want to head out early. You've certainly earned it. Thanks, Mike said, grateful for the chance to go home and process everything that had happened. As he changed out of his uniform in the staff locker room, he checked his phone and found 3 missed calls from Mrs. Chen and a text message. Zoe not feeling well. Fever. Call me. Concern immediately replaced the euphoria of the evening. Mike quickly gathered his things and called Mrs. Chen as he hurried toward the bus stop. She started feeling warm around 10, Mrs. Chen explained when she answered. By 11, she had a fever of 101. I gave her some medicine and she's sleeping now, but she was asking for you. I'm on my way, Mike promised, picking up his pace. Thank you for taking care of her. Of course, Mrs. Chen replied. She's a good girl. Just needs her father. 20 minutes later, Mike let himself into Mrs. Chen's apartment. The elderly woman met him at the door in a floral robe, pressing a finger to her lips. Sleeping, she whispered, gesturing toward her small living room where Zoe lay on the couch under a crocheted blanket. Mike approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's forehead. It was warm but not alarmingly so. Zoe stirred at his touch, her eyes fluttering open. Dad? She murmured sleepily. You're back. I'm here, he assured her, brushing hair away from her face. Mrs. Chen says you're not feeling well. Zoe nodded weakly. My throat hurts, and I'm all achy. Probably just a bug, Mike said soothingly. Think you can make it home, or should we stay here tonight? Home, Zoe said without hesitation. Mike smiled. Home it is then. He turned to Mrs. Chen. Thank you again. I don't know what we'd do without you. The elderly woman waved away his thanks. You would manage. You always do. After gathering Zoe's things, Mike helped her up from the couch. She was wobbly but able to walk with his support. The night air felt cool against his face as they slowly made their way down the block to their apartment building. "How was the fancy party?" Zoe asked as they waited for the elevator in their building. Mike looked down at his daughter, wondering how to explain everything that had happened. "It was unexpected," he finally said. "I'll tell you all about it tomorrow when you're feeling better." As they entered their small apartment, Mike was struck by the contrast between this modest home and Peterson's luxurious office. Yet somehow the events of the night had created a bridge between these two worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just hours ago. He helped Zoe to bed, bringing her water and more fever medication before kissing her goodnight. Then he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the covered keyboard in the corner of the living room. After a moment's hesitation, he stood and walked over to it, carefully removing the cloth that had protected it from dust all these years. The familiar sight of the keys brought a lump to his throat. He ran his fingers over them lightly, not pressing down enough to make a sound. "You were right, Jess," he whispered. "I found my way back." Outside the window, the city lights twinkled in the darkness. Mike Reynolds, the janitor who had made a CEO weep, stood at a crossroads he had never expected to find. Whatever he decided about Peterson's offer, one thing was certain. After tonight, he would never again be invisible. The weekend passed in a blur of mixed emotions. Zoe's fever broke by Sunday morning, but Mike's mind remained in turmoil. Peterson's offer seemed too good to be true, a chance to return to music, to use his education and passion to make significantly better money. Yet the thought of such a dramatic change brought waves of anxiety. He had grown comfortable with invisibility, with the predictable rhythms of his maintenance job. Stepping into the spotlight would mean vulnerability, expectations, the possibility of failure. On Sunday afternoon, as Zoe napped on the couch, Mike finally uncovered Jessica's keyboard and plugged it in. The electronic tones couldn't compare to the grand piano at Meridian, but his fingers remembered the keys all the same. He played softly, not wanting to wake his daughter, moving through fragments of pieces he once knew by heart. "That sounds nice," Zoe said after a while, her voice still raspy from her illness. Mike looked up to see her watching him from the couch wrapped in a blanket. "Did I wake you?" She shook her head. "Why are you playing again? You haven't touched Mom's keyboard in years." Mike's hand stilled on the keys. How could he explain everything that had happened at the party? How a cruel joke had turned into a life-changing opportunity. "Something happened at work," he began. "The CEO offered me a different job." "A music job?" Zoe's eyes widened. "Really? What kind of music job?" "Running community programs, teaching, organizing performances, using my music background." "That's amazing, Dad." Her enthusiasm was immediate and unrestrained. "Are you going to take it?" Mike hesitated. "I don't know. It's been so long since I've done anything like that professionally." Zoe studied him with an expression that reminded him painfully of Jessica, thoughtful and perceptive beyond her years. "Is that the real reason you're not sure? Or are you scared?" The question hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. "Maybe a little of both," he admitted. "Mom always said you were meant to play music," Zoe said quietly. "She told me once that watching you give it up was like watching someone slowly stop breathing." Mike felt his throat tighten. "She said that?" Zoe nodded. "She wanted you to find your way back someday." Later that night, after Zoe had gone to bed, Mike sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, writing out the pros and cons of accepting Peterson's offer. The pros column quickly filled. Better pay, work he was passionate about, a chance to use his education, more opportunities for Zoe, healthcare benefits, regular hours. The cons column remained stubbornly empty until finally, he wrote a single word: fear. By Monday morning, his decision was made. The transition wasn't easy. His first day in his new role, Mike arrived wearing the only dress shirt and slacks he owned, clothes he had purchased years ago for job interviews. He felt like an imposter, as he was led to an office on the 14th floor, introduced to colleagues who eyed him with curiosity, and handed a company laptop and phone. "Your first project will be developing the framework for the Music Education Initiative," Peterson's assistant explained, providing him with a folder of preliminary materials. "Mr. Peterson has scheduled weekly meetings to discuss your progress starting this Friday." Mike nodded, overwhelmed but determined. That night, he stayed up late researching similar programs across the country, making notes and drafting ideas. When he met with Peterson on Friday, he arrived with a clear vision and detailed plans. "I'm impressed, Mr. Reynolds," Peterson said after reviewing Mike's proposal. "This is exactly the kind of thoughtful approach Catherine would have appreciated." Over the following weeks, Mike threw himself into his new role with the same quiet dedication he had once brought to maintaining the building's floors and fixtures. He reached out to local schools, community centers, and music teachers. He developed a scholarship program for underprivileged students, organized free concert series in public spaces, and began teaching piano lessons himself 2 evenings a week. The work energized him in ways he hadn't experienced in years. There were challenges. Of course, budget constraints, bureaucratic hurdles, occasional resistance from those who still saw him as the janitor who got lucky. But Mike approached each obstacle with patience and persistence, qualities he had honed through years of hardship. At home, subtle changes reflected their improved circumstances. They moved to a slightly larger apartment in a better neighborhood, closer to Zoe's school. He was able to buy her a new laptop for her science projects and proper winter clothes, without worrying about which bill would have to wait. Most importantly, he was home more often and less exhausted when he was there. 3 months into his new position, Peterson called Mike into his office. "We've been reviewing the program's initial impact," Peterson said, indicating a report on his desk. "The response has been remarkable. Participation rates are higher than projected, and the feedback from community partners has been overwhelmingly positive." Mike nodded, proud but uncomfortable with praise. People are hungry for music in their lives. They just need access and encouragement. Peterson studied him for a moment. "You know, when I first offered you this position, I had a feeling you were the right person, but I couldn't have predicted how right. You've brought something special to this initiative, a genuine understanding of what music can mean to people who might otherwise never experience it." "Thank you, sir," Mike said simply. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Peterson continued. "The board has approved funding for a scholarship in your late wife's name. The Jessica Reynolds Memorial Scholarship will provide full music education funding for 5 students annually." Mike was speechless, emotions welling up unexpectedly. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "You don't need to say anything," Peterson assured him. "It's the least we can do to honor someone who supported your talent, even when circumstances made that difficult." As the months passed, Mike found his rhythm in his new life. He reconnected with former classmates from his college days, some now successful musicians who were eager to participate in Meridian's community programs. He composed again, creating pieces for student recitals and community performances. And slowly he began to rebuild his identity. No longer just a janitor, not quite the concert pianist he had once dreamed of becoming, but something new and meaningful. Zoe flourished as well. Her science team qualified for the state finals, where they placed second overall. Her grades remained excellent, and she began talking more confidently about college possibilities. One evening, Mike overheard her on the phone with a friend saying, "My dad runs Meridian's music programs. He's actually kind of a big deal now." The pride in her voice filled him with a warmth no applause could match. 1 year after the night that changed everything, Meridian Financial held its 26th anniversary celebration. The grand atrium was once again transformed with elegant decorations. But this time, the piano at its center was there specifically for Mike Reynolds, now officially listed in the program as music director and featured performer. Before the performance, Peterson found Mike adjusting the piano bench. "Nervous?" the CEO asked. Mike smiled slightly. "Not about the playing, just about being the center of attention. Still not used to that part." Peterson nodded understandingly. "If it helps, just remember you're not playing for the crowd or the company. Play for Catherine and Jessica. They're the ones who would most appreciate hearing you tonight." As Mike took his place at the piano, he scanned the audience. So different from last year. Faces that now smiled in recognition and welcome. Colleagues who respected his work. Community partners eager to hear him play. In the front row sat Zoe, dressed in a new outfit she had chosen specially for the occasion, her face beaming with pride. Mike began with Chopin's Nocturne, the same piece he had played a year ago when he was just the janitor asked to play as a joke. But this time, from the very first note, his playing carried a new confidence. This was no longer a man rediscovering a lost part of himself, but someone who had reclaimed his gift and made it the center of a rebuilt life. For his second piece, he played an original composition he had written over the past year, titled simply Transformation. The music told the story of his journey, from loss and struggle through unexpected opportunity to renewal and hope. As the final notes faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Peterson was the first on his feet, his eyes bright with emotion, though he remained composed this time. Nearby stood Tom, who had been promoted to facilities director and remained one of Mike's strongest supporters. And there in the front row was Zoe, clapping wildly with unrestrained joy. Later that night, as Mike and Zoe walked home through the quiet city streets, she slipped her hand into his, something she hadn't done in years, having decided at 12 that hand-holding was for little kids. "I'm really proud of you." "Dad," she said. Mike squeezed her hand gently. "Proud of you too, kiddo. Do you think Mom would be happy about everything? About how things turned out?" Mike looked up at the stars visible between the city buildings. "I know she would. She always believed this would happen someday." "What part?" Mike thought for a moment. "That I'd find my way back to who I was supposed to be all along." They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Zoe spoke again. "You know what the best part is?" "What's that?" "You're not invisible anymore." She looked up at him. "I used to hate that people didn't see you, how hard you worked, how talented you are. Now they do." Mike smiled, realizing his daughter was right. The janitor who had once moved through the building unnoticed now walked the same halls, greeted by name, his contributions recognized, his presence valued. Not because he had changed who he was, but because circumstances had finally allowed others to see what had been there all along. 1 year ago, he had been asked to play the piano as a cruel joke. That joke had become the turning point that gave him back his music, his confidence, and a future bright with possibilities he had long ago stopped imagining. As he looked at his daughter walking beside him, Mike Reynolds knew with absolute certainty that sometimes life's most painful moments can open doors to its greatest gifts, if only we have the courage to walk through them.